I still remember the exact moment my life stopped feeling like my own, because it didn't happen gradually the way people usually imagine these things. It happened in a single sentence, in a room full of people who looked at me like I was already guilty. My mother didn't ask me what happened. She didn't give me a chance to explain. She just stared at me like I was a stranger standing in her house and told me to leave, as if I had already been removed from the family in her mind before the words even left her mouth. I stood there waiting for someone to question it, waiting for my cousin to say something, anything, because I knew deep down that none of this made sense, but instead the room stayed silent in a way that felt heavier than shouting. That's when I realized something I wasn't ready to accept yet, that the story they had chosen to believe didn't need my side at all. It was already decided. What hurt the most wasn't even being blamed. It was how quickly I was replaced in their version of reality, like I had never mattered enough to deserve doubt in the first place. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I found out that whatever they believed I did wasn't even the real beginning of the story. It was already the end of something much bigger that I never saw coming. Before that moment, I wasn't someone who questioned my place in the family, because I had always been there in every situation that needed stability, the quiet one who fixed things before they became problems, the one who stayed behind when everyone else moved on. My cousin, on the other hand, had just recently become part of our daily lives again, and at first, everything about her seemed harmless, even comforting, like she was trying too hard to fit into a family she had missed for years. She knew exactly how to talk to people, how to laugh at the right moments, how to make herself sound like the most reasonable person in the room, and I didn't think much of it at the time because there was no reason to. But slowly, things began to shift in ways I couldn't fully explain. Small misunderstandings that somehow always circled back to me. Moments where something went missing or got damaged and somehow my name was the first one mentioned without hesitation. At first, I thought it was coincidence, something easily corrected with a simple explanation. But what I didn't realize was that I was already being placed into a story I didn't know I was part of yet. And by the time I started noticing the pattern, it was already too late, because everyone else had started believing it was normal for me to be the problem. It started becoming impossible to ignore when the small misunderstandings stopped feeling like accidents and started feeling like a routine, because every time something went wrong, the conversation didn't begin with questions, it began with assumptions. And my name was always already attached to the problem before I could even speak. A broken item, a missing envelope, a misinterpreted comment, none of it mattered on its own. But together it formed a pattern that I could feel closing in on me without anyone ever saying it out loud. What made it worse was how naturally my cousin stayed out of it, how easily she would step back and let the situation unfold without defending me or correcting anything, as if silence was safer than truth. And every time I tried to explain myself, I could see people already deciding not to listen, not because I was wrong, but because they had already chosen a version of events that made more sense to them. It reached a point where I started doubting myself in small ways, replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I had somehow become careless without noticing it, because the alternative, that someone was intentionally shifting blame, felt too heavy to accept. But deep down, something in me knew this wasn't random anymore, and the scariest part wasn't what they were saying about me, it was how easily they believed it without ever asking me a single real question. The moment everything truly shifted wasn't dramatic at first. It was quiet, almost ordinary, but it carried a weight I didn't understand until much later. It happened during a family gathering where everyone was already tense about something I wasn't even fully involved in, Yet somehow my name still became part of the conversation before I even realized what was being discussed. My cousin was sitting there calm, collected, speaking in a way that made everything she said sound carefully thought out, like she had been waiting for the right moment to say it. And then, in front of everyone, she said something that didn't just twist the situation, it rewrote it. Suddenly, I wasn't confused or misunderstood anymore. I was irresponsible, careless, and apparently the reason things had been going wrong for weeks. I remember trying to interrupt, not even to argue, just to clarify, but the moment I opened my mouth, I could feel the room already leaning away from me, like my voice didn't belong in the version of the story they had started accepting. No one asked me to explain. No one paused to consider both sides. It was like the decision had already been made, and I was only there to hear it. And that was the first time I noticed something terrifying. Not that I was being blamed, but that I didn't need to be guilty for them to treat me like I was. That realization didn't break me, but it started something inside me that I couldn't stop anymore. After that day, things didn't explode. They faded in a much worse way, because instead of a clear confrontation or a final argument, I started disappearing from conversations I was still physically part of. People stopped asking me directly, stopped waiting for my side, and slowly began talking around me instead of to me, like my presence had become optional in a room I used to belong to. Even my cousin didn't need to do anything obvious anymore. She had already said what she needed to say, and now the silence did the rest of the work for her. Whenever something came up, my name would surface briefly, not as a question anymore, but as a conclusion, as if my role in every problem was already settled and no further discussion was necessary. I started noticing how quickly people moved on when I tried to speak, how easily the topic would shift the moment I entered a conversation that mattered, and it felt like I was slowly being trained to stay quiet without anyone ever telling me to. That was the most disturbing part. It wasn't rejection anymore, it was replacement. Like I was still there, but no longer included in the version of the family that existed in their minds. And the worst part is, I didn't even leave yet. I was still in the same house, still sitting at the same table, still existing in the same space, but something about how they looked at me made it feel like I had already been erased long before anyone actually said it out loud. I started paying attention to things I used to ignore, because once you realize something is wrong, even the smallest details begin to feel suspicious in a way you can't unsee. The way conversations went silent when I entered the room, the way my cousin's presence suddenly made everyone more relaxed while mine seemed to tighten the atmosphere, the way decisions were made without ever needing my input anymore. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was consistent, and consistency is what makes something feel like truth even when it isn't. I remember one night sitting alone and replaying everything in my head, trying to find the exact moment things shifted, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized there wasn't just one moment. It was a slow rewriting of my place in the family. Piece by piece, until I no longer fit anywhere. And then came the moment that confirmed everything I had been trying not to believe. Something went missing again, something important enough that it couldn't be ignored, and before anyone even discussed it properly, I heard my name again, not as a possibility this time, but as the answer. No questions, no hesitation, just acceptance. That was when I understood something clearly for the first time. I wasn't being investigated anymore. I was being assigned. And once that happens inside a family, truth stops being something you prove and starts becoming something you're forced to carry. This time, I didn't even get a chance to defend myself properly, because the moment I tried to speak, I could feel that familiar resistance in the room, the kind that doesn't argue back. It just ignores you until you stop talking. My cousin didn't say much at first. She didn't need to, because the groundwork had already been done for her over time, and now all she had to do was stay calm while everyone else filled in the gaps for her. What hurt the most wasn't the accusation itself, but how natural it sounded coming from everyone else, like it had been repeated enough times in private conversations that it no longer felt like an opinion. It felt like fact. I remember looking around the room, waiting for even one person to hesitate, to question, to look at me differently for even a second, but there was nothing like that. Just certainty. Quiet, comfortable certainty that I was the problem. And in that moment, something inside me stopped trying to fix it. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't argue harder, I didn't even try to convince them anymore, because I finally understood that this wasn't about truth at all. It was about convenience. It was easier for them to believe one version of me than to question everything they had already decided. So I stayed silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because I realized no one there was actually listening anymore, and that silence became the moment I started planning how to disappear from a story they had already finished writing without me. I didn't leave immediately, and I didn't announce anything either, because by that point I understood that words no longer changed anything in that house, only distance did. So I started pulling myself out quietly, piece by piece, acting normal on the outside, while slowly disconnecting from everything that tied me into their version of reality. No one really noticed at first, or maybe they did and just assumed I would stay like I always had before, but this time something was different inside me. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped correcting misunderstandings. I stopped stepping into conversations that were already decided without me. And the less I engaged, the more invisible I became, until my absence didn't feel like something sudden anymore. It felt expected. My cousin continued to speak confidently in my place even when I wasn't in the room, and I could feel my name being reshaped without me there to interrupt it. That was the final confirmation I needed. I wasn't just being misunderstood anymore. I was being rewritten. So I made a decision I didn't fully announce to anyone. I packed what I needed, chose a day when no one was paying attention, and left without turning it into a scene. No arguments, no explanations, no final confrontation, just silence replacing silence. And as I walked away, I didn't feel relief right away, only something heavier. Because I knew I wasn't just leaving a place, I was leaving behind people who genuinely believed their version of me was real. And that truth stayed with me longer than the distance ever did. After I left, I expected anger, maybe even relief, but what came instead was something quieter and far more unsettling. Nothing changed for them at first. Life kept moving in that same direction, my absence blending into their routine like I had never been a central part of it to begin with. And that realization hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for, because it confirmed the one thing I had been avoiding the most, that I had been replaceable in a story I thought I was essential to. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever, especially when it's built on something unstable. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, small inconsistencies started to surface in the story they had built about me. A detail that didn't match, a moment someone remembered differently, a slip in confidence when my name was mentioned. And the more they spoke about it among themselves, the less certain they became about what they had been so sure of before. I never returned to argue or correct them because I didn't need to anymore. The version of me they created started collapsing on its own, not because I fought it, but because it was never fully real in the first place. And by the time they realized that, I was already too far removed from that life to be pulled back into it. All I ever wanted wasn't revenge. It was to exist without being rewritten. And in the end, leaving was the only way I could finally stay myself. If this story made you feel something, even a small moment of recognition, then you already understand what it means to be misunderstood by people who should have known you better. You don't have to go through it alone. If you want more stories like this, subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment about what part hit you the hardest.